Good morning to everyone. I am Subi from IAJJCE. Today I am going to discuss about color fundamentals. What is the color modeling image processing? Color models are fundamentals to digital image processing because they define how colors are represented and interpreted in image. Although the process followed by the human brain in perceiving and interpreting color is a physiopsychological phenomenon that are not fully understood, the physical nature of color can be expressed on a formal basis supported by experimental and theoretical results. In 1666, Sir Isaac Newton discovered that when a beam of sunlight passes through the glass prism, the emerging beam of light is not white but consists instead of a continuous spectrum of colors ranging from violet at one end to red at the other end. Violet, blue, green, yellow, orange and red. The spectrum divided these 6 colors. When viewed in full colors, ends abruptly, but rather each color blends smoothly into the next. Basically, the colors that humans and some other animals perceive in an object are determined by the nature of the light reflected from the object. Visible light is composed of a relatively narrow band of frequency in the electromagnetic spectrum. A body that reflects light that is balanced in all visible wavelengths appear white to the observer. However, a body that favors reflectance in a limited range of the visible spectrum exhibits some shades of color. For example, green objects reflect light with wavelengths primarily in 500 to 570 mm range while observing most of the energy at other wavelengths. Characterization of light is central to the science of color. If the light is achromatic, its only attribute is in intensity or amount. Achromatic light is what we will see on a black and white television set, and it has been implied component of our discussion. Term gray level refers to the scalar measure of intensity. The ranges from black to grays and finally to white. Chromatic light spans electromagnetic spectrum from approximately 400 to 700 nm. 3 basic quantities are used to describe the quality of a chromatic light source: radiance, luminance and brightness. Radiance is the total amount of energy that flows from the light source, and it's usually measured in watts. Luminance, measured in lumens, give a measure of the amount of energy an observer perceives from a light source. For example, light emitted from a source operating in the infrared region of the spectrum would have significant energy, but an observer would hardly perceive it. Its luminance would be almost zero. Finally, brightness is a subjective descriptor that is practically impossible to measure. It embodies the achromatic notion of intensity and is one of the key factors in description color sensation. Human eye can be divided into 3 principal sensing categories corresponding roughly to red, green, blue. Approximately 60% of all cones are sensitive to red light, 30% are sensitive to green light, and only about 2% sensitive to blue. Due to these absorption characteristics of human eye, colors are seen as variable combination of so-called primary colors red, green, blue. For the purpose standardization, the CIE Commission International de Illumination designated in 1931. Core color models RGB red, green, blue color model. RGB color model stores individual values for red, green and blue. It is an additive model with a color space based on the RGB color model. And three primaries are added together to create colors from completely white to completely black. The RGB color space is associated with the device, thus different scanners get different color image data. When scanning the same image, different monitors have different colors display results when rendering the same image. In the RGB model, each color appears in its primary spectral components of red, green and blue. This model based on Cartesian coordinate system. Then HSI color model, creating colors in the RGB and CMY models and changing from one model to the other is a straightforward process. As noted earlier, this color system are ideally suited for hardware implementation. In addition, the RGB system matches nicely with the fact that the human eye is strongly perceptive to red, green and blue primaries. Unfortunately, the RGB, CMY and other similar color models are not well suited by describing colors in terms that are practical for human interpretation. For example, one does not refer to the color of an automobile by giving percentage of each of the primaries composing its color. Furthermore, we do not think of color images being composed the three primary images that combine to form that single image. HSV means hue, saturation, value, brightness, color model. HSV, hue, saturation, value, also known as HSB, hue, saturation, brightness, is often used by artists because it is often for natural to think about a color in terms of hue and saturation than in terms of additive or subtractive color components. The system is closer to people experience to perception of color than RGB. For example, in painting terms, hue, saturation and values are expressed in terms of color shading and toning. The HSB space is often visualized as a hexagonal cone or cylinder where hue changes around the circle. Saturation increases from center outward and value increases from bottom to top. It allows for intuitive color selection, which is useful in segmentation, tracking and filtering where color needs to be isolated from brightness. OUV EV Luma Chroma Separation Color Model. OUV model defines a color space in terms of one Luma component Y and two chrominance components. The Y channel carries grayscale brightness information and is computed using weighted sum RGB value. The U and V components encoded color differences. U represent blue projection and V red projection related to Luma. This separation is particularly effective for video application because the human eye is more sensitive to brightness than color. By storing color data at a lower resolution, it becomes possible to compress image and video significantly without visible degrading quality.